So, so mainly the discussion last on the last session was on commentaries on Quran, or what is in Arabic a tafsir. Tafsir means explanation, giving more information about a sentence, a verse, even a word, which is sometimes needs more exact meaning. And this is not only a discussion about Quran, but rather it's in every religious scripture. And then as well, Quran narrates the story of Israelites, those Jews who who were asked to sacrifice or kill a cow in order to, practice a religious ritual. And then they come back and ask very tiny questions regarding the cow. Yeah, they're asking, "Oh, could you tell us?" Probably to Moses, could you tell us how old the cow should be? What color is better? if if you want us to have it like a black cow or like brown one. These are, however, in Islamic tradition, when someone is asking too much question about some obvious thing, they tell him that he's asking the Banu Israel questions, the questions that kind of seems not very smart questions, but the story is written in Quran in chapter 2, which is called Al-Baqarah, and there you have uh, the story. But anyway, the main point of interpretation is giving more information, or whether it is a discussion of practices, religious practices, or even if there is a discussion and question about the principles of faith and things like that. So we also stated that the interpretation starts with Quran itself and then goes on with Muhammad and his companions. In Arabic, the companions are called Sahaba. And after a group of companions, those people who were with Muhammad, those people who lived with Muhammad or in the time of Muhammad, or those people who have seen him. And then a generation or two after those people, you will have successors or or tabi'un in Arabic. So those are the ones who follow the first generation of companions. And then therefrom you have a group of people who are studied religious sciences, studied the language, were well versed in reading and understanding Quran, gathered many hadiths or sayings of Prophet about the different verses of Quran, and they put all those traditional sciences together in order to introduce, or in order to present commentary on Quran. So basically, from very early, the very first and second century, and third, especially third century on, when you don't have any companion left or any successor left, you have a number of other scholars of religious sciences who are coming and writing uh, interpretation and commentaries on Quran. But one question is that, we history of Islam has seen lots and lots of commentaries. There's no centrality or a central office to say that, well, this commentary is fine and that commentary is not fine. You know, there's not such centrality. Like, imagine if it in Catholicism, the office of Pope can somehow guide or tell people that this is the official reading of the text, but in the case of Islam, you do not have such an central office. At least in general Muslim, you may say that, okay, Shiites, they had their own imams, and they try to follow the saying of imam, but still among the Shiites you have different ideas and different kind of commentary on Quran. So the point is that when people encountered with the text, especially during the later centuries, they had question in mind, and they tried to find out the answer based on their own point of view. I just mentioned the fact that if a philosopher looks at the Quran, and if a mystic looks at the Quran, or if a jurist looks at the Quran, everyone wants to, grab the things that he thinks that are more important or must put in the priority above other things. So that's why you have different approaches to the Quran. Nevertheless, we don't forget that there are some elements that play important role in Quranic interpretation. One is the language, knowledge of language. So someone who is translating, interpreting, or writing commentary on Quran perfectly should know Arabic, but not only the language as as a skill, but like sometimes like a linguistic or grammarian also, to know how a word or phrase is used here, and what's the purpose of this, and what's the different meaning, or what's the priority of the meaning of such and such word in such and such sentences. But anyway, language and knowledge of hadiths. I mean, by hadiths, the saying of Prophet Muhammad, and then the biography of Muhammad, which is called Sira of Prophet. How he behaved when he was facing different occasions and questions and problems. And plus that, gradually different theological schools appeared in Islam. However, you can say that, well, they appeared from the very early Islam. Yes, they did, because there were questions and people had different views. But when I'm talking about a school, like in a school, so I can say that, okay, they, become more perfect or established after second and third centuries. After second and third centuries of Islam. I mean, it becomes like 6, 7, 8 centuries, our modern time. I mean, based on our date, it's like 8th century, 7th century, and 9th century, and then after Christ. So those are schools that gradually founded by people who were thinking differently. And there are main and major questions that they were trying to look at those questions based on their own point of view. And also I mentioned that Quran was interpreted based on different approaches, like historical approaches, interreligious not dialogue, but interreligious understandings, or following the comparative, like comparative studies, or sometimes philosophical, as I mentioned, approaches were used to talk about Quran and to explain the meaning of the verses. Now, in our in the materials and in the readings and the question of this week, uh, we had the chapter 112 of Quran, which is called chapter Al-Ikhlas, which sincerity. And this chapter also has is called with different names, with different titles like uh, a Tawheed, which means the unity or oneness as well. And there are some other names, but there's Al-Ikhlas or sincerity is more famous, and also the other one, as I mentioned, the Tawheed or the unity or oneness. Now, going to that chapter, which is really just 2 lines, and or with the Bismillah is 3 lines. The chapter, I hope you can see my PowerPoint, and I'm trying to make it bigger for everyone to be visible. Yes, so after Bismillah, or after in the name of God, says that say He is Allah, the One. Okay, so the point is that it appears that God talks to Muhammad, yeah, and say He's God, the One. And then the question is that one should suppose that Muhammad knows that God is one. Okay, there's one God, because Islam basically founded and established based on the principle of the unity of God, the oneness of God. There's one God. Okay. Now, it appears that based on the history, they mentioned that a group of Jewish scholars were meeting Muhammad and asking him, "Who is your God?" It was important for them. It was a question for them because they have already probably encountered Christians and they know about the qualities of God based on Christianity. Now they wanted to know about Islam. So they come and ask Muhammad, and here you are. The revelation comes to Muhammad, according to Islamic sources. This is the revelation comes to Muhammad through Gabriel from God, and there is emphasis on the oneness of God. Now, and then there are other sentences that we will touch on some of them, but later on, after having a whole complete translation, I go for the very first verse, which is more controversial or more cause of discussions. And then Allahu Samad, the second verse is the eternal or the absolute. The translation here, Samad sometimes need the one who doesn't need anything from anyone. So needless, absolute needless, okay? We know, I mean, the eternality of God. I mean, the translation that here I have quoted on in my PowerPoint, and this is not the only one. I had another sample that was like a translation was not very accurate. Yeah. So the point is that, again, the question of need, Allah Samad, the second verse, it doesn't need anyone. The vice versa is that everyone and everything needs him in his own very being, you know. in the very beginning, everything is God. And then the third one, which is kind of an answer probably to a Christian creed of, Jesus being Son of God or being part of God. And then it says that this one God, which doesn't need anyone, and everything in the universe needs him, in fact, as never begets, nor he was begotten. He has no son, kid, whatever, parents. So there's no such relation. Okay, nothing. He's alone with alone. And then وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. And then there's none comparable to him, because basically he is the creator, and God, and everything else is created. Now there's a based on this verse, there are huge differences between a creator and creation, because this is needless, the other one is needy. Now, returning to the very first verse, the point is that till قُلْ هُوَ means he is the God who is one. And in Arabic language, the discussion of one, when also in another point, God talks about himself and he explains or just narrates his own names. He talks about one, but in another form of one in Arabic, okay? Like, imagine if in English sense, you can say first one, but in Arabic, those who know Arabic, they know that there is a root for almost all Arabic words, and each of them have a three-word, most of the time, three-letter root from which different form of a word is, established and formed. So, ahad, the Arabic term here for one is ahad. There is another term for one, which is wahid. Now, in commentary, when they try to say that, okay, why ahad and not wahid? So they came up with the explanations like, well, wahid is a divine name for God, but the problem about the wahid is that the wahid is a numerical one. The other numbers can be added. While ahad denounces an absolute oneness that is unique and cannot take a second or be divided. To the second explanation is absolute oneness that is unique and cannot take a second or be divided. If something is that simple, but by simple, just you need to use your imagination. That is you cannot divide it into two. Means that it is the most simplest of the simplest things, that when you divide something, for instance, to different parts, it means that it is created or contains different parts, and it is dividable. And when you have things with different parts, the other meaning of this is that every part may need the other part. Your hand may need your body, and your body may need your brain may need your heart, and your heart needs your blood. Different things are working, and each of them, if you have one of them lost, you have problems. Now, God, in this case, is a being uh, that in philosophical term, they call him absolute being. With absolute being, they mean that you should not and cannot add any other component or any other things to that very being. You have another ideas of being, like a being of a tree, or being of a flower, being of a animal as being. And philosophically, they say that being, we can imagine that being is a simple thing, and when it takes shapes, it becomes like a tree and becomes like an animal or human being. So let's imagine what everything like trees, animals, and human beings are sharing. They share, first of all, and most important of all, is the being that they are sharing. But their being is formed in special form that, a cat is there, or a tree is there, or a human is here. But when you talk about God, that being is formless, shapeless, okay? And then beyond every form of form, space, shape. Moreover, that being is everywhere. There's nowhere that being, which is called the true being or absolute being, and in another word, God, there's nowhere that being is not there. Now, although some people may say, or some commentators mentioned that there's similarity between the meaning of ahad and wahid, one and the other one, but the ahad is kind of a oneness that negates any other being. So every being is him, and every other being that's visible for me and you share something which is called being in different forms and took different forms. Now, again, another explanation is that ahad, which is used in the verse, is the internal oneness, a higher degree of divine oneness without any consideration of its relation to the multiplicity. I'll go for more example later. And then wahid is the oneness which is in relation with the other beings, with the creations. Okay. So if you can imagine that there is God and nothing else is there, only one God, and he hasn't yet created anything. Could you imagine that there is a space out of him? Philosophically or logically, it's incorrect. When religions say that God is everywhere, then you cannot say that, imagine this is the only world existence, the only universe is here, this, in this tissue, and then God is this one, okay? And he's this one, the white paper. So everywhere is here, and he included everywhere. Now, imagine that he starts to create. The point is that, does God create the creation and put them somewhere else? Like we want to, you know, we are. He's going to make another city and then put other things, a group of people that he creates to another city, or where the place of that planet or every other thing that he creates. Because we said there's nothing, he's everywhere, and nowhere, there's nowhere that he's not there. And everything is him, because the very first and essential being is God. Okay, maybe it's a little bit complicated. So this ahad in Islamic tradition of understanding is a refer to that essence of God, which is an absolute being. Okay. Now, because every word of Quran was important for the devoted Muslims, even they pay attention to the word huwa, or he. So, because God, when he called himself, told them that, hey, tell them that he is the one. And then for Sufis, they took the word he as also referring to his very own essence and secret. Therefore, in Sufism, or even in Islamic tradition, the word he, which is in Arabic who, the similarity. So he in Arab, he in English is who in Arabic, or huwa is huwa in Arabic. So becomes also a sacred name of God, and for some, most sacred name of God, because it refers to very essence, the very essence of God, to the absolute truth, to the absolute being. That's why, as a practice, Sufis try to repeat name of God, and one of the names that they repeat, interestingly, is who. Okay, let me see if I can show you a video of this group of Sufis trying to, uh, repeat the word who. I guess I hope I can open the video. Yeah. Okay. So open it. I guess I'm going to open it. So the who, the very secret of the creator, the very secret part of the creator, the very secret essence of the creator. So what is this? Let me pass this. And okay, here it is. And this who is a breath, okay? And they see it, breath, okay? And then, I mean, I'm going a little bit inside it. This breath creates word. Our breath creates words. If you don't have a breath, you can't talk. Okay? So, what about God? God says in the Quran that it's not only in the Quran, but it's in the other scriptures, but here in Quran as well, that when he wanted something to become into being, he only says kun, be. Uh, he asked him to be, and then it's there. So again, this who, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, is referring to the very essence of him at one point, and as well it refers to the breast of God, the breast of all merciful. In Arabic culture, they call it Nafasul Rahman, so the breast of all merciful. So that breath created what? Creation. Created. It's the creative breath of God. Now, having said this, there's a question. Did he created things out of nothing or out of something? Or let me tell you, the other face of the question is that whether he created or things emanated from him. Whether he created or things emanated from him. Things coming out like a spring. Okay. All those things are discussed heavily in Islamic tradition. Okay. So what we discussed is that, well, there is a God. We refer to him as he, and, which is a sense of God. Also, based on our previous discussions, we all know that in Islamic tradition and other traditions, is names for God, attributes for him. Now, when that God does an action, which is a mercy, then that essence shows itself in the form of mercy. Or when he is creating, then that action, that essence shows him as creator, and we call him the creator. Okay. Now, so one more question here. The essence of God and names of God, historically discussed whether the essence of God and names of God are one thing or two different things. So my understanding and explanation is that when the sense acts in a way which is a merciful way, then you call it the name mercy or the merciful. Okay. Again, I also refer to creation and whether he created or he, there is an emanation from him. I'm not going to discuss about this because of time and because later on we will touch the discussion of creation. But again, based on the fact, I guess I discussed a little bit of those philosophical questions about the creation, and whether God creates or things emanate and their manifestation of God everywhere. And there was discussions between philosophers and theologians. They're most of the time in clash. And Sufis also, they sometimes they have their own ideas as well. Now, let me go back, and what I was trying to show you with this piece of tissue or paper let me show you with this PowerPoint. Those who know Chinese probably can read the Chinese part. Yeah. So the being, imagine there is only absolute God, nothing else than God, the being, okay? He is being, he is the true being, he is the only being, and there is nowhere that is outside of that being, because there's only one being, okay? This is the tradition of Islam, which appears to be, you know, in you know, harmony with some other world traditions as well. Now, this being is the real one, which is the bigger circle encompasses, and from the real one we called him Ahad, which encompasses the numerical one, which is Wahid, and is in relation with the creation, and then embodied one, which takes forms and shapes, and then there's a universal world that here you are in. Now, the other side, or the other shape of it, the real one, the numerical one, the embodied one, and the world, the hierarchy of being. Being, and this traditional point of view, is hierarchical. And then all this comes, at least at part, and most part, from the commentaries to the word Ahad. If you want to go into more details, here you are. I can send you the file and you can read it. And let me summarize one more time. If there's God, and if he created the universe, how do we think of the being of God and being of universe? Are they in two separate circles and places, or they are in fact together? Let me use another example. If this piece of cloth, okay, is all universe, and if I put it into the water, and water goes to every part of this, you have two separate things in this cloth and water everywhere, you know, everywhere of it. Can we say that the relation of God and universe is such as an example that I gave to you, involved, waved into each other, like the circle down there, that God and universe. God encompasses universe, and there's nowhere else. The being is one being. Now, for an extra example, I mentioned that Jews were asking Muhammad. In fact, the one God is a common similarity and belief between Islam and Judaism. And however, both of these two religions accept Christianity as monotheist religion that has one God, but with the interpretation of that God in three being. But now, in Old Testament or in Jewish Testament, there is Shema Yisrael, a verse in the chapter that is similar with this chapter 112 of the Quran. No, it says that Shema Yisrael hear, or Israel, and says that the Lord is our Lord, our God. The Lord is one. The oneness is emphasized, and there are similarity with this one. I mean, this is taken in some discussions and studies. They show the similarities among them. Shema, sadly I don't know Hebrew that well, but Shema is like Arabic word for listen. I mean, isma. Isma. You know, interestingly, when God talks to Moses, sometimes he says, "Listen, Isma, Shema," and then when he talks to Muhammad, he says, "Read, Iqra." So this is another similarity between Jewish Testament and Scripture and with Islamic one. Okay, now